So in starting to spring the vamp, we place 0.1 and 0.2 on that straight line, and then mark in from 0.3 all the way down like this. So we place 0.1 and 0.2, 0.1 and 0.2, and then we'll mark in from 0.3 down like so, and leave it there. Using 0.1 as our pivot, we'll bring down the tip of the vamp to this straight line. We'll bring it down like so, and then mark in from that tip to 0.4 on this right angle. We'll keep our pivot on 0.1 and take it back to where we started. See, this is where we started at 0.3 and 0.3. This is where we started. Using that our pivot, we go to 0.5 now. That is aligning this whole thing, this whole top area on the straight line. Take 0.5, put 0.5 on the straight line, and then draw in the under like so. Still keeping as 0.1 as our pivot, we come back down to 0.2 and then finish off. Come back down to 0.2 and finish off the entire thing. So 0.1 has been our pivot all this while. So we're back to where we started. 0.1 is still the fulcrum of everything. Now, this is 0.2 and that's 0.3. So we'll move our pivot from 0.1 to 0.3. And then I said we add, let's say, 1 cm, 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeter away from 0.2. Using 0.3 as our pivot, we'll move until that 1 millimeter mark lies on the straight line. Then if we eyeball, or you can actually do a right angle from that 1 millimeter away from that place, but it's okay if you just eyeball the right angle. This is our straight line coming all the way from here to here, so just right angle coming downwards like so. Right angle coming downwards like so. So it's here. Now 0.3 was our pivot when we did it, so we move our curve until it gets to that point. This point now becomes our next pivot point. But before we pivot, we add another 1 millimeter to that top part, and then using this place as our pivot, move it until that 1 millimeter lies on the straight line. We eyeball our 90 degrees again, and we have our next pivot point. Before we pivot, however, we have our next pivot point. Before we pivot, however, we draw in the curve. This is now our next pivot point. We mark 1 mm away from that point, then we pivot again until it lies on the straight line. We eyeball our 90 degrees. This is our next pivot point. Before we pivot, we draw in the curve. From here again, this is our next pivot point. We can draw in our next 1 mm. This is our next pivot point. Until we get there, 90 degrees, we draw. So this is basically our last pivot point. We put it until the rest of the thing lies on the straight line, and then from here we can conclude. So we've actually just sprung this vamp. All that we need to do is to duplicate it, add our lasting allowance underneath like so, add our lasting allowance, and because we are going to crimp, I also like to add my crimping pull allowances. So I'll have like this, so that I'm actually not pulling into the work itself, but I have places to pull around here, so I can add. But we'll just duplicate this, and then that will be it. So let me go ahead and duplicate this. And use my glue trigger. This It's actually awkward when you're filming and doing this. I have to keep in one place so that I do not alter the view of my camera. If I wasn't filming, it would have been, easier to do this. But it's okay. Just punch. I'm very much because you need to pull that not in my pull balance for printing. And also that's printing on there. Printing on the edges, that's too thin. So I'm going to use the other piece. Just quite ahead. This is get that edges. So you can start with this makes it easier for me. Not trying to.